Hello, welcome back. I hope your time away was wonderful and beautiful and kind, like all the things you can find in a Princess and the Frog movie. Such a very wonderful movie. Such a very wonderful singer. I love Anika Noni Rose with everything in my heart. And speaking of Princess and the Frog, we are almost there. Almost there. All right, that's all. Congratulations, you made it to a week. I'm so very proud of you. You have done the work and the readings and watched these videos and watched me ramble and be in love with poems and stories and essays. And based on your responses to the work, you too have been in love with these poems and stories and essays. And so I just want to say one more time, congratulations on making it to the week. And we have another week that I'm so excited to dive into with you all. Now, let's go ahead and get started into the work for today. Today we were looking at our final love, which is agape, which is God's love. Now, as said to you all before, I'm not, this is not about me, having believed everything in these particular videos. I could believe everything in the videos. I could believe absolutely nothing in these videos. I could be somewhere in between. You don't know. I don't know. But the point of this is to present you with the things that we can, be able to springboard off of. With that being said, just like with regards to arrows, and its very clear bias to heteronormativity, Agape has a very clear bias to Judeo-Christian beliefs, which you may or may not be, which you may or may not subscribe to. Uh, with that being said, I'm interested in the type of love that Agape is interested in, or rather, I think this love is one of those forms of love that the Greeks think about. Now, that's interesting, right? Because it questions other forms of religious love, and so this Christian belief of religious love, of God's love, comes from one deity, right? So, like, how does that differ from religions that have multiple deities, that are polytheistic, ones that don't may not necessarily have deities, that are more concerned with earthly things? What are your thoughts? How do these things? How do you think that these things would differ from one, the Greek understanding of agape; two, C.S. Lewis's understanding of the Greek form of agape, right? And so some of the things that jumped out to me in watching the Agape video, which is very, very interesting. Which actually there doesn't C.S. Lewis wasn't as much concerned with God's understanding, right? Or God's love to the people, right? So it was, of course, in there, but people's understanding of God's love, right? And accepting of God's love. So, for example, one of the things that really was interesting to me is that all creatures are temporary, right? And to give love to a temporary being is to court disaster, which I think is so very interesting, and uh, because it bleeds into, or for lack of a better term, not bleed, um, into the work for today. And with that, we're going to start with who will greet you at home, which I think is just such an interesting and cool story. Um, you know, this is, I think, it's the first what we have, a story that deviates from our strict sense of realism. And I think it's so cool in this way. I think some people would describe it as fabulous. Um, some people would talk about, some people use terms like magical realism. But taking a step away, I want to talk about how magical realism, coined by Marquez, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, the Nobel laureate, one of the Nobel laureates. uh, who wrote 100 Years of Solitude and Love in the Time of Cholera. So if you ever heard Love in the Time of COVID or anything in the time of COVID, that comes from him with his novel Love in the Time of Cholera. With that being said, he talked about magical realism as strictly a form of literature that derives and that lives in Latin America that is addressing colonialism. So anything that kind of exists outside of it would be something different. So in this particular case, while if this story had been written by a Latinx writer, it possibly could have been magical realism, but because it was not, it's fabulous. And also, if it was written by a Latinx writer, the content would be different just by virtue of the fact that Leslie Aneka Arima is a Nigerian writer who is interested in Nigeria, right? So that's where this particular piece is set. She's a short story writer, an incredible short story writer, I would say. Who is able to, in these small spaces, create these large, expansive worlds. So interesting, right? Like this is a world that, that does not need sex to procreate, right? It does not necessarily mean that sex is not had somewhere in this world, but we see that the women are creating new life, children, right? Not with the use. Not with a partner, or rather not with a sexual partner, but with their mothers. That's very, very interesting dynamic. One that women historically have found such strong social ties and such strong social support with each other's communing. And Leslie Arima has taken it a step further and saying not only is there support that will be given, but the actual inception is between mother and daughter. And I think that's so interesting. What I also think is interesting that this story, that we're placing this story, we're reading this story after having read Eros, right? Which is again C.S. Lewis's bias with love between the sexes, which if we think of sex as strictly a biological necessity as a thing for procreation, but now we have subverted that thing. And did you notice anything about this story, about something that's missing? All right, I'll give you maybe about 5 seconds. There's no men. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that absolutely wonderful? There's no men in this story. I think it's so great, right? A world without men, beautiful. Or not a world without men, but a story without them, right? Like this, you don't matter here. You don't matter. Men don't matter in a story about procreation, which is what so many people say to be against homosexuality. And it's just like Leslie's like, I don't care nothing about that. Also, Leslie is a queer woman. So imagine the worlds, you want to be in, or create the worlds that could be, that should have been, maybe. I don't know about should have been. I'm not interested in the should have, could have, woulds. I'm interested in what ours and what this story is very, very incredible. Really beautiful sentences in this piece. Something that really struck me was at the bottom of page 6, when we see the mother and child and woman who are making a spectacle of themselves, and it says, one would think the baby was loved, right? Period. And the sentence that struck me was, mother cradled mother who cradled child, a tangle of ordinary limbs of ordinary women. What's beautiful about this is that there's a music in the sentence, right? So music is derived partly from repetition, a bouncing in shoulders, mother cradled mother who cradled child, right? And then we get this very cool symmetry that is, like an equation. So mother who cradled mother equals who cradled child, all right? And each of them in a tangle of ordinary limbs of ordinary women, right? And so it's a circle that it ends up being also like cyclical, right? A thing that hugs itself, that creates itself, that pushes itself, no matter what. I think that's just a very 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 wonderful sentence. Um, so let's talk a bit about the craft here, or rather, let me take a step back. I still want to interrogate agape in this particular piece. So my question, right, is like, what happens when the life that you create is only yours, right? So we see that the children aren't necessarily beholden to anyone but the mother here, and so I bring this story up with regards to agape, partly because I was thinking about God's love as God. What is God love, and how does God love? What does God think about love? However, right, like to be honest, I'm not necessarily interested in what God thinks about love in a practical sense. And what I mean by that is theologians. That is a job and joy and craft of theologians to study what God might think, what God might do, and the nature of God. But me, I am an artist, and I am more concerned with the nature of people. And through the stories, we get the nature of people, and I think in stories we get very very close to God. And in this story, we get women who get to, in a small sense, maybe, I don't know, what do you think? Play God, right? Not play, but are bestowed with the powers of a slight power of God. So all one has to do is go to your mother after shaping a child out of clay, and sing to it. Which actually thinking about that is very reminiscent of, don't laugh at me here, Wonder Woman. So if you know the DC comic Wonder Woman, Diana Prince, um, her mother, what was the mother's name? Hippolyta. Hippolyta is a race of Amazonians, and so they were all women. And Hippolyta wanting a new child, so they had been cast away for, I think, by Zeus or someone. They went to their own island, Paradise Island, and they never aged past that point. And because of that, there was no new children for like hundreds of years. But Hippolyta wanting a child. Went to the beach and crafted a child out of sand and water, and asked Zeus to bless the baby to create it, and that was how Wonder Woman was created. And so there's that. And so my question is, what happens when what do we see people doing when a life is not beholden to a partner? So we have Ogechi. Yes, Ogechi. Ogechi has tried to bear many children, has tried to create many children. But if you, we're going to descend into some touchy things for a quick second. If you think about women who have lost children before, even before they were children, miscarriages, or women that lose children as when the children are, babies, or only a few months old, that stays with people for an incredibly long time. An abortion, these things stay with people for a very, very long time because there are lives that one could have gotten. But there's a interesting relationship to God's love, right? Because what happens when you are the sole creator of a thing? What happens? What is a relationship to a thing that does not come from one's body, right? And so part of the love that is, and part of the love that is attached to a child, right, is like the love that one is pushed out, that one incubates in one's body and is a part of self until it is out, and it is a self that is out in the world, right? And that's thinking this through the woman's perspective, or rather a person who can bear children perspective. A perspective that I am only trying to place myself in because I have no idea, nor will I ever have any idea because I cannot bear children. Um, but I'm thinking about these things, right? How do you think about these things? What is what does it mean? What does this means for God? What is it we see at the end of the piece that Ogechi kills the hair baby? Um, what does this mean for God's love? Right, that this woman has been given a bit of like women have been in this particular war are given a bit of God's power. And when the child is trying to harm you, right? I won't say easily it's killed, but there wasn't. You talk to mothers with children that they. I'm gonna take a step back from this. I actually don't want to go down that road. Again, my question is, what does it mean for God's love that to solely create, one can kill a bit easily? What does it mean for our love, right? Through the love of people, right? When we think about agape, I'd like to know. Now, to go to think about craft levels, this story was wonderfully propulsive. This story was not necessarily as concerned with moving back and forth into backstory like we had in our Pat and Sam story. Pat and Sam, we were in the present and then we'll jump back in the past, right, to think about it or to look at a scene that happened years ago. This story is like, all right, one of the babies died and we're just going to keep going and keep moving. The story is only concerned with the present. And so my question is, right, like how are we given insights into the past without creating entire scenes, right? What are some of the things that you saw? What are some of the ways that you saw it throughout the piece, right? So one of the places that I saw it is at the top of page 4. And at the top of page 4, we see this. Next, or right at the bottom of 3, next she gathered up the silky strands and began to wind them, round and round until the ball of hair became a body and nubs became arms, fingers. The strands tangled together to become nearly impenetrable. This baby would not snag and unravel. This baby would not dissolve in water or rain or in nail polish remover as the plastic baby had that time. This was not a sugar and spice child to be swarmed by ants and disintegrate into sugar in less than a day. This was no practice baby formed of mud that she would toss into a drain miles away from her home, right? And so we actually, so this is when thinking about point of view, this is a third person point of view story, right? But again, like, extending ourselves into this idea that point of view is who is telling it and why is it being told. The third point of view is squarely within Ogechi's experience and mind. We don't get whomever's thoughts. If we do get a thought, we get what Ogechi thinks that person might think, or what Ogechi sees on the person's face, right, and what she is interpreting that particular thing to think. So we get in this moment, not Ogechi thinking about this past, but the narrator recalling and pulling this past information from Ogechi. And maybe Ogechi thinks about this subconsciously, but through her movements, right, she's doing the thing. But we get, we don't have to say, here's the scene with the plastic baby and the nail polish. Here's the scene with the baby getting swarmed by syrup. Here's the scene that she's throwing away that mud baby in a drain. It's an aside, but it's something that just a few sentences that gives us a past, that gives us wants and fears, that gives us internal conflict, that possibly gives us a plot. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Moving on to the Like Jesus to the Crows. This poem makes me so happy. I think the music in this poem is so nice. When I talk about music, the way that, my shoulders jump, right? the way that the lines propel you through to the next phrase, right? They just sound so pretty, um, right? Like Jesus to the crows that gathered there along his arms upon the invitation of a slender limb. Beautiful image, by the way. And not oblivious to human violence, perhaps needed rest or needed to offer the succor of presence, despite the stiff collar of their feathers, despite each one being no less the children of a father who claimed an upper realm. It is not true they pecked his eyes, nor did they consider his wounds their own. They were neither irreverent nor quiet. They spoke in the tongues they knew. They cawed full-voiced and would have released him from his bindings had their beaks held the power and had there been time in that place. Like them, I have sought to comfort and be so comforted. Like them, I have seen the failure of miracles when they were most needed. Like him, I have called upon those so unlike myself when my father failed to answer. Right? What I want to impress upon you all, I was reading it very pretty dramatically, but these are the ways that poets are shaping lines, right? So like them, right? Like them, like him, right? And so these that switch, right? Like them, like him. And so if you're in band, I was in band. I played the oboe and the alto saxophone. It made me very, very happy. But it's like them, like him, right? And so you can create something that's very interesting, right? And so we get that repetition of like them. The like hims is a subverts our expectation. It gives us and it pushes us. It makes you happy. It's satisfying. But we're gonna move away from that because I can talk a long time about that. And I would like to make these videos shorter. Sort of, maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Thinking about agape with regards to this poem, there's an obvious reason that I'm using this throughout with regards to the Judeo-Christian understanding of God, right? Or at least with this strictly Christian understanding of God. Jesus is the Son of God, also God, one of the Trinity. And so what's interesting to me is that Livy Francis, who is the writer of this poem, and Kingsley Tuft winner, a poet who is concerned with black women and a bit of religion, God. But what's interesting, as I said before, we're not theologians, us writers, us artists. We're artists. We are concerned with earthly things, such as the crow approaching Jesus. What does it mean that we approach Jesus from the crow? Why does the speaker do that? Right? Why does the speaker approach Jesus from a person? This is Jesus, right? This is God. So we have the crow approaching God, and we have the thoughts of the crow approaching God. What does it matter that the crow is looking at God? Who care? Who would care, right? This is just a crow. This is maybe something that doesn't have the intellectual means to ponder the nature of God. So why are we approaching? So why is this through that particular view? What are existential questions of God's love to the crow? Right? What does it mean that the crow is asking? What does it mean that the speaker is wondering what the crow is asking? What are the questions that could even be asked? And then where do we end? Right? This is a really interesting turn, right? We talk about turns in poems. Like him, I have called upon those so unlike myself and my father failed to answer. There's this interesting thing, right, which the part of the reason I'm bringing all these things, this poem and this story to you all's attention with regards to Agape, is that it's my sense that maybe all of God's love is always paternalistic, maybe, and so one maybe can't think about God without thinking about parents, maybe, I don't know, or where one came from where one came. Um, right? So that's looking up, right? So like one can't think about God without thinking from where they came. And one can't think about God's love without thinking about what one has control over, maybe. I don't know. Um, I'm certain theologians, I'm sure, have thought about these things. Artists have thought about how people think about these things. We see, right, with regards to these particular stories. What are your thoughts? Moving to our assignment for today, um, we're moving from internal conflicts in our character-driven plot flowchart to external conflicts. We're going to combine external conflict and plot today because I want to finish it, and then we're going to move to something else next week. But luckily, these things are like, they go hand in hand because, excuse me, what we get for so we have our three times we have our information. I'm still talking about information at this point. Our information gives us our want and fears. Our wants and fears, from wants and fears comes movement, right? So as I told you all before, it is my belief that people, you know, break free from inertia only when they are when they move towards a thing or they move away from a thing, right? So our wants and fears, wants are a thing that we move towards, fears are the things that we move away from. So from wants and fears come movement, right? From movement, from those wants and fears come our internal conflict. From internal conflict come the complications of that movement. And next, we now move into external conflicts. And from external conflicts comes the consequences of that complicated movement. And from that, right, from the external conflict, right, from that complicated movement comes plot. Now, let's think about for a second how to go from internal conflict to external conflict. So internal conflict is, as I said before, the complication that comes from wanting or fearing opposing things, and the movements that come from that. And so, for example, let's use. Sure. We're gonna just go ahead and use "Who Will Greet You at Home." So in the story, the internal conflict comes from the fact that Okichi wants she wants a child that is pretty, that is sweet looking, that will be you know aesthetically beautiful, nice to hold, right? But she also wants a baby that will last, right? And so she made that baby out of yarn. She made the first baby out. It's a yarn baby, which is soft, which is what she wanted, which is pretty and probably delicate, right? Which is what she wanted. But then that didn't last, right? And so now she's confronted with the fact that I want a baby that is pretty, and that is love. That is that makes me feel loved, and that feels all nice. But then I also want a baby that's sturdy, and so the way we get from internal conflict to external conflict is that a decision is made by the character, right? And then that decision is acted upon. So what I mean by that is internal conflict is the differing things of what Ogichi wants in a baby, but Ogichi has decided, right? We see the Ogichi decide, right, in real time that she's going to take the hair, right? But a decision is not an action. Just because one decides to do a thing does not mean that they will do it. And that is psychologically interesting as well, because if one can make a decision, um, then one has to grapple with the fact that they are either going to make the decision and deal with the consequences, or not make the decision and grapple with the fact that they did not make the decision for whatever reasons. Ogechi made a decision, and what we call this is a dramatic action, right? And so a decision that is acted upon that turns the story, that moves the story further along in plot. So again, in order to go from internal conflict to external conflict, a decision is made and that decision is acted upon, right? And so we get the external conflict that is making the baby out of hair, right? And the conflict comes from the fact that making hair babies, according to myth, is dangerous, right? Not only dangerous, like it kills. And then from that external conflict, we get a story arc, right? We get plot, which is the story arc, right? It might not be, it could be an arc, or like when I say arc, I just mean, I use the term because that's just the term that we use, but a plot can go this way, it can go this way, it can go this way, it can do many things. But plot is how, are the problems in the story and how one works through those problems to get to a satisfying end. This is narratively speaking, right? So I'm not necessarily concerning myself with, when I say this, I'm talking about how the writer is engaging, giving the information with regards to the things. So when we think about plot comes from dramatic action after dramatic action after dramatic action, right? And so, as I said before, a decision is made, right? We see the decision that is made. We see the decision that is thought by Ogechi when she decides to take the hair, and then she actually does take the hair. What are some other moments of dramatic action in the piece? There are many moments, right? On behalf of Ogechi, that she makes a decision and acts upon that decision, and it is a plot point. I can think of a few more. I'm sure you can think of a few more. Tell me some. Now, with regards to your assignment for today, what I want you all to do is think about how now you're creating story, right? So we've created the characters, and now we have to put the characters in a world, right? We have to put the characters in situations. External conflict is situational, so we have to put the characters, right, and make them do things. And so now is where I want you to begin to think about and start writing that story. So you've created a character. What do their internal conflicts mean they're going to come up against, right? A character who has no feelings about dogs, probably won't have a story that makes them run towards a dog or run away from a dog when they see one. So why even include a dog, right? So like, don't do that if they're not, whatever. But someone who fears dying alone, and wants a partner might have stories that are worth telling about them trying to find a partner and coming close to finding a partner, and either succeeding or failing, right? Like these are the things that we want to see. We want to see how people grapple with their contradictions. So go ahead and think about, so begin writing that story. What I want you to do is list about 3 external conflicts that could arise from those internal conflicts, right? And once you list those 3 out, actually list out 5. List out 5, and then we're gonna move, but then we're actually gonna move to the weekend assignment that I'm gonna tell you all about in another post. With that being said, that is all I have for today, my loves. I shall see you again next week, bright and early Monday. Please stay safe. Please stay sane. Please stay healthy during the weekend. I shall see you all later. Bye-bye.